June 11th, 1944. Philippine Sea, west of Saipan. The sky is already crowded with contrails when Lieutenant James Jim Harlow feels the aircraft shudder. Not turbulence. Impact. The F-6F Hellcat lurches violently to the right, engine screaming as the nose dips. Warning lights bloom across the instrument panel like sudden wounds. Harlow tastes metal in his mouth, adrenaline, fear, something else, as smoke begins to seep into the cockpit. "Damn it," he mutters, fighting the stick. Below him, the sea stretches endless and blue, broken only by white caps and distant flashes of gunfire. The carrier task force is somewhere behind him now, shrinking fast. Ahead, nothing but open water and the faint outline of Saipan's coast, hazy through heat shimmer. The Japanese Zero that did this is already gone. Harlow doesn't chase it. He can't. Oil pressure drops to nothing. The propeller slows, then freezes. The engine dies with a final cough that feels almost human. Training takes over. Harness tight. Canopy unlocked. Mayday sent. Brief, clipped, automatic. Hit, engine out, bailing. He doesn't finish the sentence. The Hellcat is falling too fast. At 2,000 feet, Harlow pulls the handle and throws himself clear. The slipstream tears him sideways, rips the breath from his lungs. Then, silence. The parachute blossoms above him with a jolt that snaps his spine straight. For a heartbeat, he just hangs there, legs dangling, the world eerily calm. Then he looks down. The Pacific rushes up. The water hits like concrete. Cold. Crushing. It steals the air from his chest and spins him under. Parachute lines tangling around his arms. He fights free, breaks the surface, gasping. Above him, the parachute collapses and sinks. Around him, nothing. No ships, no aircraft. Just the sun, the waves, and the slow realization settling in. He is alive, and according to everything Japanese doctrine says, he should not be. From the deck of a Japanese destroyer maneuvering south of Saipan, Ensign Hiroshi Takeda watches the sky through binoculars. He sees the American fighter hit, sees the smoke, sees the pilot bail out, and then, impossibly, sees the parachute open. Takeda lowers the glasses slowly. "He survived," he says, almost to himself. The officer beside him snorts. "For now." Takeda isn't so sure. In the Imperial Japanese Navy, the idea of surviving being shot down is complicated. Pilots are taught from the beginning that their duty ends with the aircraft. Capture is shameful. Rescue, if it happens at all, is rare, dangerous, and often deemed not worth the risk. A pilot lost is a pilot gone. But the Americans, they behave differently. Takeda has seen it before. A downed American pilot splashing near a task force. Smoke markers dropped almost immediately. Planes circling low, not attacking. Watching. Waiting. Then the boats. Fast. Purpose-built. Crew trained for one thing. Recovery. Takeda tightens his grip on the binoculars as he watches a tiny yellow dot appear on the water. A life raft. The American pilot climbs into it, movements clumsy but practiced. He has done this before. Takeda knows it. Back in the raft, Harlow checks himself quickly. Bruised ribs, cut lip, shoulder screaming where the harness yanked him. Nothing broken. He pulls the emergency radio from his vest, extends the antenna, and begins transmitting in short bursts. He doesn't panic. He doesn't pray. He waits. Because the system is already in motion, high above, a pair of Hellcats circle, weaving lazy arcs in the sky. They're not hunting. They're guarding. One of them waggles its wings, a signal Harlow knows well. They see him. Minutes later, the sound reaches him, a distant growl growing steadily louder. Not aircraft. Engines on the water. A grey shape breaks the horizon, spray flying from its bow. A U.S. Navy destroyer escort, charging hard, smoke pouring from its stacks as it cuts straight toward him. Harlow laughs, a raw, disbelieving sound. He's been in the water less than 20 minutes. When the ship looms over him, sailors already leaning over the rail, lines in hand, Harlow finally feels it. The tremor in his hands, the delayed fear. A boatswain shouts, "Got you, sir! Hold on!" Strong arms haul him aboard. Someone slaps his shoulder. Another shoves a canteen into his hand. The world smells like oil, steel, and coffee. Alive. Again. A day later, on Saipan, a captured Japanese naval officer listens as an American intelligence officer describes the engagement. "Yes," the American says casually, flipping through a report. "Pilot recovered. Already debriefed. He'll be flying again in a few days." The Japanese officer looks up sharply. "Again?" he asks. The American nods. "Of course." The officer's expression shifts. Not anger, not resentment, confusion. "But his aircraft was destroyed," he says. "He was shot down." The American shrugs. "Happens." That moment, quiet, understated, plants a seed of disbelief that will grow over the coming months. Because the Japanese are about to realize something that terrifies them more than American firepower. The Americans do not just replace airplanes. They replace experience, and that changes everything. The contrast becomes impossible to ignore by the summer of 1944. In briefing rooms across the Central Pacific, Japanese commanders study engagement reports that refuse to make sense. American air losses are heavy, sometimes brutal, yet the same names keep reappearing in after-action summaries, the same pilots, the same call signs. Men who should be gone, they are not. Rear Admiral Masatake Okumiya circles a line on a chalkboard map during a staff conference on Tinian. Red marks indicate confirmed American aircraft destroyed. Blue marks show subsequent encounters. "These pilots," he says, tapping the board, "were shot down weeks ago." A junior officer hesitates. "American reports indicate rescue, sir." Okumiya's jaw tightens. "Rescue is incidental," he says. "Combat effectiveness should decline." But it doesn't, and that is the problem. The American system does not treat pilots as expendable extensions of their aircraft. It treats them as capital. From the moment a U.S. naval aviator straps into a cockpit, there is an invisible structure surrounding him. Rescue doctrine, standby assets, radio protocols, dedicated recovery craft, and rotation policies designed to preserve experience rather than consume it. Downed pilots are not assumed lost. They are assumed recoverable. Search and rescue destroyers shadow task forces. Submarines are assigned lifeguard duty along expected strike routes. Seaplanes wait at the edges of battles, engines warm. Crews scanning the water for parachutes and smoke. Fighters orbit downed comrades instead of pressing attacks, and it works. By mid-1944, American naval aviation is not just growing, it is remembering. Pilots who survived Coral Sea fly at Midway. Men shot down over the Solomons return over the Marianas. Combat lessons learned the hard way are not buried with wreckage at sea, they are carried forward. Every rescue preserves instinct. Every rotation preserves judgment. Every survival compounds advantage. Japanese doctrine allows none of this. Imperial Navy pilots are trained with extraordinary rigor. But little expectation of survival once combat begins. Recovery is secondary. Capture is dishonor. Rescue operations are rare and risky, often dismissed as distractions from the mission. A pilot who goes down is written off. His experience dies with him. This made sense. Once. In the early war, Japanese aviators were among the finest in the world. Their skill compensated for the system's brutality. But by 1944, attrition has hollowed the ranks. Veterans are gone. Replacements arrive with fewer hours, less confidence, and no margin for error. Against them fly Americans who have already been shot down and lived. Lieutenant Harlow feels the difference immediately. 3 weeks after his rescue, he's back in the air. Not over Saipan, but over the Philippine Sea again, escorting strike aircraft. His Hellcat is new. His hands are steady. He knows what tracer fire looks like when it's too close. He knows how to read flak patterns. He knows when to break off and when not to. Across from him, a Japanese pilot lines up for an attack he cannot abort. He has no second chance, no system waiting to pull him from the water. When his Zero spirals down trailing smoke, there is no parachute, no rescue, no return. Captured Japanese officers begin to speak of it openly. "We believed losing the aircraft meant losing the man," one says during interrogation. "You believed losing the aircraft meant saving the man," another shakes his head. "You fought knowing you might live. We fought knowing we would not." That difference changes behavior in ways doctrine never predicts. American pilots take calculated risks. Japanese pilots take final ones. By late 1944, the sky itself reflects the imbalance. American formations adjust, adapt, remember. Japanese formations shrink, fragment, vanish. And somewhere beneath it all lies a truth that Japanese commanders struggle to accept. The Americans are not winning because they fly better machines. They are winning because they refuse to let experience die. June 19th, 1944. Over the Philippine Sea. The sky is empty, and then it isn't. From the deck of the carrier, USS Lexington, Lieutenant Commander Edward Butch O'Hare's successors watch black dots multiply on the horizon, growing rapidly into the unmistakable shapes of incoming aircraft. The radio crackles with urgency. Radar plots tighten. Orders snap into place. This is the moment Japanese naval aviation has been training for, and the moment it cannot survive. American fighters climb to meet the raid, engines howling, wings flashing in the sun. Hellcats form loose, flexible pairs, pilots talking constantly, calling contacts, warning each other off bad angles, adjusting instinctively. These men have been here before, some over Guadalcanal, some over Rabaul, some, impossibly, after being shot down and pulled from the sea. What follows will later be called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. But from the cockpit it feels nothing like a massacre. It feels like control. Japanese pilots fly with courage. No one disputes that. But courage is not enough when experience is gone. Many of the incoming aviators have fewer than 200 flight hours. Some barely half that. Carrier landings practiced on short strips. Gunnery drills abbreviated to save fuel. Navigation learned from chalkboards instead of sky. They fly straight. They hold formation too long. They commit to attacks that should have been aborted. American pilots see it immediately. "He's not braking," one Hellcat pilot mutters into his microphone as he lines up a Zero that should already have turned away. He squeezes the trigger. The Zero erupts in flame. What the Japanese command does not realize, cannot realize in time, is that this battle is not being decided today. It was decided months ago, when American pilots were pulled from the water instead of written off, when squadrons rotated veterans home to train replacements instead of burning them out, when experience was treated as something to be saved, not spent. As wave after wave of Japanese aircraft are destroyed, American losses mount too. Pilots bail out. Planes ditch. Men hit the water, alive. And almost immediately, the system activates. Destroyers race toward smoke flares. Submarines surface under fire. To haul aviators aboard, seaplanes splash down amid wreckage, crews dragging half-drowned men from the sea. By nightfall, dozens of American pilots who would have been listed as missing, presumed dead in another war, are eating hot food aboard ships. They will fly again. Japanese pilots will not. In the aftermath, Japanese officers stare at the numbers in disbelief. Over 300 aircraft lost. Veteran air groups annihilated. And worse, no depth left to replace them. Rear Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa listens as staff officers explain that pilot training pipelines cannot recover fast enough. Fuel shortages limit flight hours. Carrier decks are empty not from damage, but from absence. The air arm is broken, not temporarily, permanently. Captured documents later reveal the shock. "We believed we were inflicting losses," one Japanese officer writes, "but their strength did not diminish. Because the losses were incomplete, the men were not gone. They returned with stories, instincts, and scars that turned into advantage. American pilots understand this, even if they never articulate it. They fly knowing that if they go down, someone will come. That belief changes how you fight. You push, but you don't waste yourself. You adapt, because you expect to be alive tomorrow." Japanese pilots fly knowing there is no tomorrow, and so they burn brightly and briefly. By late 1944, interrogations of captured Japanese naval officers begin to repeat a theme. "We could not understand how your air strength stayed constant," one says. "We counted your losses carefully." An American intelligence officer replies, simply, "So did we." But the Americans counted something else too. Who came back? The war in the air is no longer balanced on machines or numbers. It is balanced on memory. And memory, once lost, cannot be rebuilt under fire. November 1944, Atsugi Naval Air Base, Japan. The interrogation room smells of damp wood and kerosene. A single bulb hangs from the ceiling, swaying slightly with each distant aircraft movement outside. Lieutenant, junior grade, Thomas Reed, U.S. Navy, sits on a wooden chair, flight jacket gone, hands resting calmly on his knees. 2 days ago he was in the air. 1 day ago he was in the water. Now somehow he is alive. Across the table, a Japanese naval intelligence officer studies him with thinly veiled curiosity. The man is not cruel, not angry. He is confused. "You were shot down," the officer says through an interpreter. "Your aircraft destroyed." Reed nods. "Yes." "And yet," the officer continues slowly, "you are here." There is an edge to the statement, not accusation, but disbelief. Reed waits. "How long," the officer asks, "before your forces recovered you?" Reed thinks. "Maybe 40 minutes? Destroyer picked me up." The officer's pen stops moving. 40 minutes, he repeats quietly. He looks up, eyes narrowing. "And you expect to fly again?" Reed shrugs. "When they give me another plane." The silence that follows is heavy. For Japanese officers, this exchange borders on the incomprehensible, because in their war, a pilot who goes down is not a resource to be reclaimed. He is gone. The Imperial Japanese Navy and Army Air Forces entered the war with a doctrine shaped by a single, unforgiving belief. A pilot's value lay in his willingness to sacrifice himself. Training was long, brutal, and selective. Only the best survived it. But once trained, pilots were expected to fight until they were killed. There was no rotation, no recovery pipeline, no expectation of survival after loss. The result was elite airmen in 1941 and early 1942, men whose skill shocked the Allies at Pearl Harbor and in the opening campaigns. But the cost was hidden. Every veteran pilot lost took years of experience with him, and nothing replaced it. American doctrine evolved differently, not because Americans were braver, but because they were pragmatic. U.S. planners looked at pilots not as expendable warriors, but as capital investments. A trained pilot represented thousands of hours of instruction, fuel, aircraft wear, instructor's time. Losing one was expensive. Recovering one was priceless, so systems were built. Carrier task forces operated with destroyers assigned explicitly for pilot rescue. Submarines were stationed near strike routes. Air-sea rescue squadrons flew amphibious PBY Catalinas into combat zones to pluck men from the ocean. Even deep behind enemy lines, rescue was attempted. Not always successful. but always expected. Japanese interrogators begin to notice something else. American pilots speak casually about having been shot down before. Plural. "You were rescued previously?" one officer asks incredulously. "Yes," the pilot answers. "Guadalcanal, 43. And you returned to combat?" "Yes." The officer sets his pen down slowly. "In our air service," he says carefully, "a pilot who survives being shot down is extremely rare." The implication is clear. Survival itself is unusual. By 1944, this difference is no longer theoretical. It is visible in the air. American pilots maneuver aggressively, but not recklessly. They break off bad attacks. They disengage when damaged. They choose survival without shame. Japanese pilots, flying with diminishing fuel and shrinking training, commit fully, because doctrine demands it. One philosophy preserves experience, the other burns it. Captured Japanese officers begin to voice this realization openly. In one post-war interrogation, a former IJN Air Staff officer admits, "We believed your pilots must be inferior because they abandoned aircraft. We did not understand that they were being saved and returned. Returned with some with lessons. Each American pilot shot down and rescued becomes more dangerous the next time he flies. Each Japanese pilot lost becomes irreplaceable. By early 1945, the imbalance is complete. American squadrons are filled with men who have survived multiple combats, multiple shoot-downs, multiple missions. Japanese squadrons are filled with men flying their first. The skies reflect it. Lieutenant Reed will survive the war. He will fly again. He will instruct younger pilots, passing on lessons learned not from manuals, but from experience bought at the cost of near death. Years later, he will try to explain the war to his children. He will not talk about dogfights. He will talk about rescue, about knowing that if you fell, someone would come. Because that belief, more than speed, more than firepower, shaped how the war was fought in the air. And when Japanese officers finally understood it, it was already too late. February 1945. The waters off Iwo Jima. The sea is violent today. Dark swells crashing against volcanic rock, spray whipping sideways in the wind. Above it all, the air war rages without pause. Fighters dive. Tracers arc. Engines scream and vanish into cloud. Lieutenant Commander Edward Ned Hargreaves, U.S. Navy, feels the impact before he hears it. His F-6F Hellcat jolts hard to the left. Warning lights flare red across the instrument panel. Oil pressure drops instantly. "Damn," he mutters, already pulling back on the stick. He doesn't think, "Am I going to die?" He thinks, "Where can I put it down?" That distinction matters. Hargreaves rolls out of the fight, smoke streaming behind him. He knows exactly what to do, because he's done it before. He trims the aircraft, lines up the water, and punches out just before the Hellcat cartwheels into the sea. The parachute snaps open. Cold spray hits his face. Below him, he can already see it, a grey shape cutting through the waves. A destroyer, coming for him. On the bridge of USS Hugh W. Hadley, the lookout never takes his eyes off the falling pilot. "Man in the water!" he shouts. The ship turns immediately. This is not bravery. This is procedure. American naval doctrine has turned rescue into reflex, and that reflex is costing Japan the war. Japanese observers on Iwo Jima notice the pattern immediately. American pilots are shot down and then reappear days or weeks later, sometimes flying the same squadron, sometimes leading it. One captured Japanese naval aviator will later admit, "We believed your losses were unsustainable. We were wrong. You lost aircraft. We lost men." The difference is devastating. By 1945, American air units operate on a rhythm built around survival and return. Pilots fly combat tours, fixed numbers of missions. When they reach the limit, they rotate out, not because they are broken, but because the system understands something the Japanese command never embraced. Experience compounds. A pilot who lives becomes exponentially more valuable. In Japanese doctrine, there is no such thing as rotation. A pilot fights until he is killed, or crashes, or runs out of fuel, or becomes a statistic. By late 1944, Japan's air services are bleeding expertise at a rate that cannot be replaced. Training programs are shortened. Fuel for flight hours is rationed. New pilots take off with barely enough time to master landing, let alone combat, and they face American squadrons filled with men who have already survived death. Sometimes twice, sometimes more. The psychological effect is profound. American pilots fight knowing that mistakes are survivable. Japanese pilots fight knowing that mistakes are fatal. One doctrine produces caution, learning, adaptation. The other produces rigidity, and eventually desperation. Japanese officers begin to understand the truth too late. In one intercepted report, a Japanese air group commander writes, "Enemy pilots demonstrate unreasonable confidence. They disengage when damaged and return later with greater effectiveness." Unreasonable. That word appears again and again. Because the confidence is not cultural. It is logistical. It is systemic. It is engineered. Back in captivity, Lieutenant Reed hears similar stories from other downed pilots. One had been rescued by submarine, another by Catalina flying boat under fire, another by destroyer in the middle of a surface engagement. Each story reinforces the same realization. America is not just fighting to win battles. It is fighting to keep its pilots alive. When the kamikaze campaign begins in earnest, the contrast becomes horrifyingly clear. Japan now institutionalizes death. Young pilots are sent on missions with no return planned, not because it is effective, but because there is no alternative left. The experienced pilots are gone. The fuel is gone. The doctrine of survival was never built, so it cannot be improvised. American pilots watch the kamikaze attacks with a mixture of shock and grim clarity. They understand what it means. An air force that no longer expects its pilots to survive has already lost the future. After the war, Japanese officers will speak openly about this turning point. Not Midway, not Guadalcanal, but the moment they realized American pilots were being recovered. Not replaced, recovered, returned, improved. Lieutenant Commander Hargreaves is pulled from the water 42 minutes after hitting the sea, wrapped in blankets, handed coffee, logged as rescued. In 3 weeks, he will be flying again. In 3 months, he will be training new pilots. In 3 years, he will still be alive. That continuity, from cockpit to water to cockpit again, is the invisible thread that Japan never managed to cut. Because when an enemy can lose an aircraft and keep the pilot, the war becomes unwinnable. August 1945. Atsugi Naval Air Base, Japan. The runway is quiet in a way it has never been before. No engines warming. No last-minute inspections. No pilots jogging toward aircraft with helmets under their arms. Just heat shimmering over concrete and the distant sound of boots on gravel as American military police establish a perimeter. Inside a commandeered operations building, Japanese naval officers sit at long tables, backs straight, faces hollow. The war is over. For the first time in years, there is no need to pretend otherwise. Captain Masao Kuroda, former staff officer with the 3rd Air Fleet, flips through a stack of captured Allied reports, translated overnight. His fingers pause on a familiar phrase. Pilot recovered. He sees it again, and again, and again, sometimes annotated with coordinates, sometimes with the name of a ship, sometimes with nothing more than a time stamp and the word successful. Kuroda closes his eyes. This more than bombs or carriers is what haunts him. In the days after surrender, Allied intelligence conducts thousands of interviews with Japanese officers. The questions are methodical, calm, almost academic. When did you realize the war was turning? What surprised you most about American operations? Where did Japanese planning fail? Again and again, a theme emerges, one the interviewers did not initially expect. Not industry, not radar, not numbers, pilots. Survival. A former Japanese flight instructor explains it plainly. You treated pilots as assets to be preserved. We treated them as consumables. He pauses, choosing his words carefully. Once consumed, they could not be replaced. American officers listening to these statements exchange glances. They know this instinctively, but hearing it from the other side gives it weight. The U.S. Army, Air Forces, and Navy had spent the entire war doing something that looked, at times, inefficient. Pulling veteran pilots off the line, rotating aces home, assigning combat-experienced men to training commands instead of keeping them in the fight. To Japanese observers, this looked like waste. To American planners, it was multiplication. Every pilot saved became 10 pilots improved. Every rescue became future victories. The numbers tell the story starkly. By late 1944, the average American fighter pilot in the Pacific had dozens of combat sorties behind him. Some had survived being shot down once, a few twice. They flew knowing their odds were never zero, but never final. Japanese pilots, by contrast, entered combat with minimal hours and almost no margin for error. One mistake meant death, one hit meant disappearance, and every disappearance hollowed out the force a little more. A Japanese Army Air Force officer, interviewed in early 1946, puts it in terms of mathematics. You could lose planes and still fight, he says. We could not lose pilots and still exist. He gestures toward the ceiling. Your pilots learned, ours vanished. This reality reshapes post-war understanding inside Japan's military establishment. Doctrine reviews begin quietly, away from the public eye. Training manuals are rewritten. Words like rotation, recovery, and attrition management appear where once only sacrifice and decisive spirit existed. Too late for the war, but not too late for the lesson. Across the ocean, American pilots are already returning to civilian life. Some step into cockpits again. Airlines, test programs, research units. Others walk away entirely. But almost all of them share one thing. They lived. They lived because when they went down, someone came for them. Because somewhere in the planning rooms of Washington and Pearl Harbor, survival had been treated as a combat multiplier. Lieutenant Reed is released from captivity in late September 1945. He is thinner, older, but alive. He is interviewed by Navy historians weeks later. They ask about the prison camp, the interrogations, the guards. Then one historian asks a different question. What surprised you most about the enemy? Reed doesn't answer immediately. Finally, he says, they didn't understand why we expected to come back. The historian raises an eyebrow. Expected? Reed nods. We didn't think we were immortal, he says. We just knew the system wasn't done with us yet. That sentence will not make it into the official report, but it should have. Because wars are not won by courage alone. They are won by systems that assume survival and plan for it. Long after the wrecks are raised from the sea and the airfields return to silence, this difference remains. One side believed that dying proved devotion. The other believed that living preserved power, and when those beliefs collided over the Pacific, the outcome was never truly in doubt. The Japanese officers could not believe American pilots survived being shot down. By the time they understood why, the war was already over.